On the morning of February 15, 2023, the quiet city of Elmsworth, Texas, woke up to horrifying news. Pastor Warren Wade Calloway, a well-respected minister, was arrested for the brutal murder of his concubine Raylan Porter. The night before, Wade had discovered Raylan's affair, and his anger erupted into a violent attack. In a fit of blind rage, he beat her mercilessly, stabbed her multiple times, and ultimately set her on fire inside her apartment. The first 911 call came in at exactly 6:42 a.m. "There's something burning. I think it's a body. Oh my God, it's a person." The voice belonged to Geraldine Pike, a 67-year-old woman who had lived in the Oakwood apartment complex for nearly 2 decades. She had been up early as usual, getting ready for her morning prayer. The smell of smoke and something sickly sweet had drifted into her room through the cracked window. At first she thought someone had left food burning, but the odor was different, thicker, heavier, like burnt meat. Her shaky feet carried her toward the hallway. Apartment 4C, just down the corridor, had its door slightly ajar. Smoke curled out from the top of the frame, barely noticeable in the dim morning light. Geraldine hesitated, gripping her robe tightly around her frail body. With a deep breath, she stepped forward and pushed the door open wider. The moment she saw the body, she staggered back, a shriek escaping her throat. Lying in the center of the small apartment, sprawled like a broken doll, was Raylan Porter. Or rather, what was left of her. Her skin was charred in places, blackened and peeling as though she had been cooked alive. The room smelled of burned fabric, melted plastic, and something more sickening, the unmistakable stench of roasted flesh. Her once beautiful face, the same one Geraldine had seen smiling just days ago, was twisted in a frozen scream, her mouth slightly open, lips scorched beyond recognition. The firefighters arrived within minutes. Though the flames had already died out, their source was evident. The mattress still smoldering from where the fire had been set. The fire chief examined the scene quickly. But this was only the beginning. The night before, February 14, 2023, had started like any other Valentine's Day in Elmsworth, Texas. Restaurants were packed, couples exchanged gifts, and love filled the air. But for Pastor Warren Wade Calloway, it was a night that would end in blood, betrayal, and fire. At 8:15 p.m., Wade sat in his car outside the Blue Orchid, an upscale restaurant downtown. He wasn't there for a romantic dinner with his wife, Miriam. No, he was watching Raylan Porter. The woman who had consumed his thoughts for 2 years, the woman he had sinned with more times than he could count, the woman he had convinced himself belonged only to him. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as he saw her laughing, her hand resting on another man's forearm. A stranger. A man Wade had never seen before. Raylan was wearing a red dress, the kind she knew drove him crazy. Her long, honey blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders as she leaned in close, whispering something into her date's ear. The man chuckled, his fingers brushing against hers. Rage boiled in Wade's chest. She had told him she was spending the night alone. She had told him she didn't celebrate Valentine's Day because it was just another day. But here she was, smiling, flirting, betraying him. For the first time, Wade saw her for what she truly was. A liar. A deceiver. A Jezebel. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. His hands clenched into fists. Still he waited. He watched them order dessert, share a slice of cheesecake, hold hands across the table. By the time they stood to leave, Wade had made up his mind. She would not get away with this. At 9:47 p.m., Raylan and her date parted ways. She got into her car, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind her. She drove straight home, humming along to the radio, feeling warm from the wine and the night's company. She had no idea Wade was following her. No idea that this was the last night of her life. At 10:15 p.m., Raylan Porter pulled into the parking lot of the Oakwood apartment complex. The air was crisp and a soft breeze carried the scent of rain, though the sky remained clear. She shut off her engine, reached for her purse, and stepped out, humming a tune under her breath. She was in a good mood. The date had gone well. David, that was his name, was sweet, charming, and nothing like the men she had been with before. Nothing like Wade Calloway, the man who had controlled her life for far too long. She felt free. But as soon as she reached her door, that feeling disappeared. Something was off. She fumbled with her keys, but the nagging sense of unease grew stronger. Then she felt it, the presence of someone behind her. Before she could react, a deep, familiar voice sent a chill down her spine. Had a nice time tonight? Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly she turned around. Wade Calloway stood in the shadows, leaning against the wall, his face unreadable. Her heart began to race. She forced a small, nervous smile. Wade, What are you doing here? He stepped forward, his gaze dark and piercing. I should be asking you the same thing, Raylan. You told me you were staying home tonight. She swallowed hard. I was, but a friend invited me out last minute. Friend? His voice was low, measured, dangerous. That didn't look like just a friend, Raylan. She sighed, her shoulders stiffening. I don't owe you an explanation. We talked about this, Wade. I told you I needed space. Wade clenched his jaw. Space? He let out a bitter chuckle. Is that what you call it now? Lying to me? Sneaking around with other men? Raylan's fingers tightened around her purse. She had seen Wade angry before, but this was different. This was worse. I didn't lie, she said, her voice softer now, trying to keep him calm. I just didn't think it was any of your business. That was the wrong thing to say. Wade's expression darkened. His nostrils flared, his hands forming tight fists at his sides. Not my business, he echoed. You think you can just use me? String me along until you find someone better? Raylan took a cautious step back. She needed to get inside. Wade, please, it's late. We can talk about this another time. She turned, trying to slide her key into the lock, but before she could, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist tight. She gasped. Wade let go, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned in, his face inches from hers. You think you can walk away from me, Raylan? His voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with something terrifying. You think I don't know everything about you? Where you go, what you do, who you're with? She struggled, but his grip tightened. Panic set in. Wade, you're hurting me. You hurt me first, he hissed. And then he snapped. Without warning, Wade shoved her inside the apartment, slamming the door shut behind them. The night was just beginning. The door slammed shut with a deafening thud, shaking the thin walls of apartment 4C. Raylan stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of her rug. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest as she pressed her palm against the wall, steadying herself. Wade Calloway stood in front of the door, blocking the only exit. His breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling in deep, uneven bursts. His face, once calm and controlled, twisted with rage, betrayal, and something else, something much darker. Raylan's pulse quickened. Stay calm. Stay smart. Wade, she started, her voice shaking but firm. You need to leave. He took a step closer. I need to leave? He repeated, almost amused. You're telling me to leave? After everything I've done for you? Her fingers trembled as she inched toward her phone, which sat on the kitchen counter just a few feet away. This isn't right. You're angry. We should talk when you've cooled down. I don't need to cool down. His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. You lied to me, Raylan. You played me. I never played you. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that sent chills through her bones. You said you loved me. Raylan's throat tightened. I cared about you. Liar, he roared, his eyes flashing with fury. Before she could react, he lunged forward, grabbing her arm and yanking her toward him. She let out a sharp scream, but his grip was iron tight. Wade, stop, she pleaded, struggling against his strength. This isn't you. But the man standing before her was not the Wade she once knew. The pastor. The man of God. The devoted husband and father. That man was gone. The Wade standing in her apartment was someone else. Someone consumed by jealousy, rage, and an uncontrollable need to hurt. Was he good? He spat, his fingers digging into her arm. Did he touch you the way I did? Stop it. Raylan slapped him across the face with every ounce of strength she had. For a brief moment there was silence. Then Wade's face darkened. He snapped. With terrifying force he shoved her backward. Raylan's body hit the kitchen counter, her ribs slamming against the edge with a sickening thud. A strangled cry escaped her lips as she collapsed to the floor. Pain exploded in her side. She tried to crawl away. He grabbed her by the hair. Wade, please, she begged. He didn't listen. Rage took over. He dragged her across the floor, her nails scratching against the hardwood as she struggled. She kicked. She fought. She screamed. But he was stronger. The first punch landed across her cheek, snapping her head to the side. White-hot pain shot through her skull. The second one made her vision blur. By the time the third blow landed, she barely felt it. Blood pooled in her mouth. A metallic taste coated her tongue. She was losing. And then she saw it, the knife. Just a few feet away, lying on the counter beside the stove. A small, sharp kitchen knife. Her last chance. With the last bit of strength left in her battered body, she lunged for it. Her fingers wrapped around the handle. She swung. The blade sliced across Wade's arm, leaving a thin, bleeding gash. He staggered back, shocked. Raylan gasped for breath, using the moment to crawl toward the door. Almost there. Just a little further. But he recovered too quickly. Before she could reach the handle, he grabbed her again. This time he took the knife from her hands. A cold, deadly glint filled his eyes. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered. Then he plunged the blade into her stomach. A sharp, searing pain tore through Raylan's stomach as the knife sank deep, its cold steel slicing through flesh. Her eyes widened in shock, her lips parting in a silent scream as warm blood spilled over her hands, soaking her red dress a deeper shade. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling. Above her, Wade stood motionless, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The blade, still gripped tightly in his shaking hand, dripped with her blood. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of anger, regret, and something else. Something monstrous. Raylan gasped for air, her hands pressing against the wound as if she could hold herself together. "Wade," her voice barely a whisper, weak and fading. "Please, don't." But he didn't stop. Instead, he crouched beside her, his breath hot against her cheek. "You ruined everything," he whispered, his voice eerily calm. "You played with me. You made me believe you loved me." Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the blood pooling beneath her. She wasn't ready to die. Her body felt cold. The world around her started to blur. Wade stood up, towering over her. This wasn't enough. She had to disappear completely. With frightening precision, he moved around the apartment, grabbing what he needed. A bottle of lighter fluid from under the sink. A box of matches from the drawer. The room was deadly silent except for Raylan's ragged breathing. She could hear him unscrewing the cap of the fluid, could smell the strong chemical scent as he poured it over the furniture, the curtains, and her body. Raylan's eyes fluttered open, panic setting in. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't obey. "No. Please," her voice came out as a weak, broken whisper. Wade ignored her. With a flick of his wrist, he struck a match. The small flame danced between his fingers, casting an eerie glow in the dimly lit apartment. His eyes locked onto hers one last time. "This is the only way," he murmured. Then he dropped it. The flames erupted instantly, spreading like a living thing. Within seconds, the room was ablaze, the fire hungrily devouring everything in its path. Raylan let out a final, choked sob as the heat engulfed her, flames licking at her skin. The pain was unbearable. Wade stood there watching for a moment, then turned and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. He didn't run. He didn't look back. By the time the smoke billowed into the night sky, Raylan Porter was gone. And Elmsworth, Texas, would never be the same again. The fire raged for nearly 30 minutes before the first 911 call came in. By the time the Elmsworth Fire Department arrived, flames had already engulfed apartment 4C, sending thick, black smoke curling into the night sky. Firefighters battled the blaze, working frantically to control the inferno before it spread to the other units. As they stormed through the scorched wreckage, one of them found what remained of Raylan Porter. Her body was unrecognizable, a burned and twisted silhouette beneath the rubble. At 6:42 a.m., the official report was made. A homicide investigation was launched. The sun was just beginning to rise when the police found Wade Calloway sitting alone in his car outside a small diner on the east side of town. He had parked in an empty lot, his hands resting on his lap, his eyes fixed on the cracked windshield in front of him. He hadn't moved in hours. The moment the squad car pulled up behind him, Wade didn't flinch. He didn't try to run. He was waiting for them. Officer Derek Lively approached the driver's side cautiously, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "Pastor Calloway," he called out. "Step out of the vehicle." Wade exhaled slowly and nodded. He reached for the door handle and opened it without hesitation. The officers were expecting resistance. They got none. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Wade finally spoke. "Is she dead?" he asked. Officer Lively tightened his grip on Wade's arm. "You already know the answer to that." A slow, sad smile crept onto Wade's lips. He closed his eyes. "I had to do it," he murmured. "She betrayed me." No struggle. No denial. A full confession in broad daylight. The officers exchanged glances before guiding him into the squad car. As the door slammed shut behind him, Wade leaned his head back against the seat, staring at the ceiling. Outside, across town, reporters were already gathering near the Oakwood apartment complex, cameras rolling, broadcasting the breaking news that would shake Elmsworth to its core. Local pastor arrested for murder of mistress. As the police car pulled away, Wade took one final glance out the window. On the doorstep of their home, Miriam Calloway, his wife of 21 years, stood frozen, clutching a Bible in her hands, her face pale with shock. Her perfect world had just collapsed. And Wade Calloway, once a man of God, was now nothing more than a monster in cuffs. The trial of Pastor Warren Wade Calloway became one of the most sensational cases in Elmsworth, Texas. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and former churchgoers who once saw him as a spiritual leader, a mentor, and a man of faith. Now he was on trial for murder. Wade sat at the defendant's table, his once pristine image shattered. He no longer wore his neatly pressed suits. Instead, he was dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled in front of him. His face, once full of confidence, was pale, lined with exhaustion. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Julian Price, wasted no time painting Wade as a dangerous, jealous man who couldn't handle rejection. "This is not just a crime of passion," Price told the jury. "This is the premeditated murder of a woman who trusted him." A man of God? No. This was a man of control, of obsession, of violence. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage from the Blue Orchid restaurant showed Wade watching Raylan from his car on Valentine's night. Phone records proved that Wade had texted Raylan repeatedly, demanding answers, threatening her. Forensic analysis confirmed Wade's fingerprints on the knife, the lighter fluid bottle, and the matchbox used to start the fire. Most damning of all, his confession at the time of his arrest. The defense, led by public defender Carla Ruiz, tried to paint Wade as a man who simply lost control in a moment of heartbreak. "He is not a monster," Ruiz argued. "He is a man who made a terrible, tragic mistake. Let's not define him by his lowest moment." But the jury wasn't convinced. The courtroom fell silent as the jury foreperson stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Warren Calloway, guilty of first-degree murder." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Some cried. Others nodded in approval. Wade didn't move. He simply stared straight ahead, his expression blank, emotionless. The judge, Honorable Lisa Cartwright, adjusted her glasses and looked directly at him. "Pastor Calloway, you have been found guilty of the brutal and calculated murder of Raylan Porter. You betrayed not only this woman, but your family, your church, and the community that trusted you." She sighed, shaking her head. "There will be no leniency. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." A murmur spread through the room. Miriam Calloway, his wife, broke down in tears. His 3 children sat quietly in the back, unable to look at their father. And Wade? For the first time he showed emotion. A single tear slid down his cheek. Not because he was sorry. Because he knew this was the end. Elmsworth would never be the same. The church that Wade Calloway once led shut down permanently. Many of his former followers struggled to understand how a man who preached about love and faith could commit such a horrific act. Miriam Calloway and her children left Texas, choosing to start over somewhere far away, away from the shame and the whispers. And Raylan Porter? She became another tragic name on the growing list of women who had been killed by the men who claimed to love them. This story is a chilling reminder of how jealousy, obsession, and control can turn deadly. If you found this case shocking, tragic, and eye-opening, then help spread awareness by liking this video to support the content and subscribing to my channel for more real-life crime stories and true crime discussions. What do you think about this case? Could Wade's rage have been prevented? Thank you for watching. Stay safe. Until next time.